Good evening. It's just a real pleasure to be not just back in Erie, but back with you all. As I mentioned, I'm an Erie native. I work as an independent consultant in the private sector over in Europe as a project manager, and I develop and manage pollution control and infrastructure projects, among other industrial projects, with a keen eye toward fossil fuel reductions. Yeah, so the title is Lengthy American Infrastructure and Social Justice Trends in this Era of Excess. And so let's dig into that a little bit. This era of excess, what does it mean? I'll try to put it into the context of these two terms, environmental equity and transportation equity, and these are going to be familiar to many of you. So to start with the definition, environmental, the extent to which all groups of people receive equal treatment and protection under environmental statutes, regulations, and practices. And you'll notice that it frames the definition in terms of law, legislation. But the challenge with this is that with respect to many of the societal problems that we have that involve equity, and with respect to many of the environmental problems, it's individual human behavior that is actually at the root cause of all of it. And so it's not to say we shouldn't be working on legislation and working collectively, but if we're going to have a conversation, particularly about environmental equity, that conversation is going to be incomplete if we only talk about legislation and regulations and acts and things like this. And so to emphasize this a little bit, let's start off by allowing Mark Osiki to put Mark Osiki into the hot seat. And so you see my itinerary about how I got here this week, and you can see that we've got a nice transatlantic round-trip flight from Frankfurt to Toronto, and then I drove down here, a 3-hour drive. And so my round trip, 2.8 tons of desire-based greenhouse gas. This desire-based, anything that I'm doing in Erie this week, whether it's hanging out with family or doing this kind of thing, I could have done it online, but I just wanted to be here. And so if you think about this 2.8 tons, it's real physical matter. It exists. It's not that it's invisible and therefore it doesn't have a mass or anything. Take a Tesla Model X, multiply that times 2. That's how much I've put in terms of real physical mass upstairs into our atmosphere. Now let's go back to environmental equity. Is my behavior equitable or inequitable? And I have really pondered this in a daily because I'm close to the data. I understand the atmosphere. I understand what is going into the atmosphere because this is my job to know this. And so here I am. It's real hard stuff, right? Okay, but that's environmental. And let's get away from that and talk a little bit about transportation. US DOT, a nice definition, equity in transportation seeks fairness in mobility and accessibility to meet the needs of all community members. And so, again, we're looking for some sort of balance there that collectively our behavior is beneficial to everybody and not just, say, one more privileged sector of society. And so the best way to put this into the local context is look off to the right, 15% of the residents in property in Erie County, and of course you're much closer to these numbers and what they look like and what they feel like for people than I am on an outsider. But if you look at that and you take a look at those poverty lines, and then you look over at what's happening over here, that poverty line, you can see you've got only about 1% of those folks out of that 15% of the population own automobiles and are using them to do what we do, like get up here today, okay? Let's look at the questions that it begs. If we've got 15% of the residents only contributing 1% of the driving and all the associated pollutants and things, problems that come out of that, we have to ask ourselves, or at least I must ask myself, are these non-drivers being adequately served by what we do in society, either individually or collectively? We talk a lot about universally available healthcare, but about universally available mass transit. They're now becoming old questions and maybe even stale questions for some, but it is a question of transportation equity that we're talking about here. And then also on the environmental side, just being imperiled, are we running a lot of excess traffic through neighborhoods possessing society's most vulnerable? So again, my own behavior today, I'm using these arteries and I'm driving, is my behavior equitable or inequitable? So it's a question that I must ask myself. Let's take a look at the MPO. I think everybody knows they've been very, very busy because it's a TIP season, Transportation Improvement Program. And we see it here, and it looks good, it's nearly $250 million, projected over a 4-year period. It's wonderful. We've got a little bit up there on public transportation projects, but you look at it and you try to detect some sort of balance, and you see it represents 4% of what the MPO have to work with. Now, it's not to disparage the MPO in any way. They work hard, and they've got the challenge of aging infrastructure, and it's high maintenance. They've got to make sure that the funding goes toward at least sustaining what we are all using, including me for the past week. So another thing to consider is that public transit, it's a tough business, high variable cost, variable ridership. If it goes down, the operating capital goes down. Still haven't recovered from COVID. But then there's this guy here. Cars and commerce are forever the dominant force in infrastructure funding. And so, again, these are all symptomatic of what we, including me over in Europe, it's no different there, of what we have to work with. But let's move on and see how now society is trying to reset itself to at least maybe counter some of these things. And this, of course, the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, it's very well known to everybody, and it's an election here, and so we're hearing it daily. The politicians are out there, and they're talking about those things. Public safety, creating jobs, which I'm happy to see for all my colleagues in the construction trades, delivering a more equitable future, and they've even got the nod to climate in here. And it's really embedded in there in very potent ways. If you see the CRP, Carbon Reduction Program, I love this. Projects designed to reduce transportation emissions. And so if your project is really proven to get the carbon down and get people in motion through other means, there's specific funding that you can qualify for. It's absolutely the right reset. That's all well and good until you look at where the BIL funding has actually been going. This takes us up to the first quarter of this year. And so, okay, we've got some different things that it's flowing toward, but if you look at this highway expansion, 1/4 of that is going to highway expansion. What does it mean? New roads. We've all seen additional lanes going in on the interstates, or maybe even a little bit closer into the city of Erie. And so that's money that is not necessarily flowing toward improving transportation equity or environmental equity. And I have to say this, it is perpetuating or promoting low occupancy vehicle usage. And so for some of you that may be a thing, environmentally, for others, maybe not. For me personally, it's a very potent thing. And so we have to really consider that where the cash is going. But again, I don't want to get on this disparaging path of criticizing what we're trying to do, because there is good work going on out there. This actually takes us over into both realms, into transportation equity and environmental equity. If you look at Secretary Buttigieg's policy statements, this is quite recent, reducing negative impacts on transportation projects with environmental concerns. And it's rather lengthy, but if you just read down, these key excerpts, projects which are intended to provide transportation of the community at large sometimes imperil communities that have environmental justice concerns. And we all know what that means: more noise, more traffic. Are we doing anything where we are inducing demand on a major road and just causing more traffic to flow through or adjacent to an impoverished neighborhood where you've only got that 1% of the people driving, And so, but this is a very potent statement here. The U.S. DOT's office is responsible for environmental reviews of transportation projects. They're going to take the necessary steps to support this. And so, what it means, environmental impact assessments, EIAs, really, really vital. Not just to protect the atmosphere, but also to protect folks in the locale of the project. And so, now municipalities, whether it's the public advocacy groups, folks like yourselves on a commission, you've got a tool that really enforces that we are taking the appropriate action when it comes to something like an environmental impact assessment. This has not always been the case. And I see a jurisdiction after jurisdiction where just because it's government funded, somehow get around it, you know. You have to challenge that, you know. So Mr. Buttigieg, he's recognized that, or this his department has. This is another one, same thing, reconnecting communities. And so wherever you've got a neighborhood that has been severed because a major artery has been placed through it, now there's an effort on where that will be studied, and transportation or infrastructure projects would be contrived in such a way that they would not worsen that or possibly undo it. So these are all great things. We can go a little bit more locally. This will be a project known to most of you out on East Bayfront Connector, exactly right here when I was a little kid. Okay, we've got the East Bayfront Connector going through there. But if you've ever tried to cross that, say, at the intersection of East Eighth and Bayfront Connector, even if you're reasonably fit, you know, it's a tight road. But now they're putting in medians, they're putting in advanced signalization, and so that person with a walker or possibly a wheelchair or somebody that just needs more time, now they've got a fighting chance to at least make it halfway across before the traffic signal goes green and that next fusillade of cars comes hurtling toward you. So great money spent, very, very, very low-cost project. You see how quickly they're doing it. And so, again, society is trying to reset itself. When did this happen? 1992, 94, this time frame, I think, for the connector. 95. And so now here we are some decades later, but society has a different expectation. And so this is great. You know, this is another really interesting one here, and I'm certain you're familiar with this too. This trail connection Erie to Corey.
This is our planning department project.
Oh, congratulations! This is so cool. You know, I actually got up and went over to my wife, you know, and I said, I'm showing her the computer. You know, she's trying to say, look what they're doing in Erie County. You know, we've all been on rail to trail conversions. You know, running, walking, biking. You know, and it's a recreational kind of thing. But that's changing now. You know, we've got e-bikes, we've got e-cargo bikes, we've got bikes where a parent can fit 2 toddlers in the back and take them to, you know, to the kindergarten or whatever it is. Students going to the uni, people going back and forth to work, and so their character is changing. And this has the potential to be real practical infrastructure. Okay, the recreational element is cool, and you know we like to recreate. This is an example of a rail to trail. Everything that you see here, this is in my neighborhood. This was previously sort of a fringe, abandoned industrial rail yard. It only had 1 or 2 tracks going through it. And so they ripped all of that out, and they put in what is now turned into a pedestrian autobahn, or all these little villages, and you can see the prosperity that's springing up next to it. We've got very, very nice new housing now going all along one side. You've got little park spaces. There's even some new cafes that they took old railroad buildings and converted them into coffee shops. You know, let's close it out here and talk a little bit about what else is going on in my old neighborhood. The redevelopment authority, City of Erie, you know, they've nailed it. You know, we've got the East Bayfront Greenway Trail Plan, where if you look at what is this back here, all of the blighted properties, you know, they are either vacant properties or properties that have become uninhabitable. And so somebody had the foresight to, you know, just step back and squint at it and envision how can we create a thoroughfare for the non-motorized public to be able to go from 10th Street and kind of wend their way down toward Bayfront amenities, or maybe to the bus that runs on 6th Street or vice versa. And so this is what it looked like in its origin. And then if you look at it in its current form here, well, you know, they've nailed it. You know, we've got 10th Street here, 6th Street, 6th Street, you've got going, you can see on the other end there. And if you just kind of follow along here, and you can see what they've done, you know, pocket parks interspersed throughout, lighting everywhere, and it's paved, and they've selected intersections along the dead-ended roads for people to be able to cross safely. You know, so you have to be parallel, you know, going through a high-traffic intersection. It's genius. I lived in the city of Atlanta for quite a long time, let's face it there. And I witnessed two projects like this, one of them just on the edge of my immediate neighborhood. And you know, it was the same thing, the urban blight that just, you know, left people looking at each other thinking, there's no way to recover things. But the city did this. And within, I would say less than a decade, the uplift that it created, the prosperity for the residents, it didn't become gentrified. You know, folks just moved in and just repaired the housing that was there. And so it still has a kind of funky vibe to it, you know, it's cool. But on the other hand, you know, small shops started trying plummeted because there was a people presence. This, you know, compared to a big infrastructure project, I can name it, but I'm not going to. This is nothing to do. You know, the funding is so minimal, and you know, it makes complete sense. You know, we've got our Bayfront Parkway, or East Bayfront Parkway. I just learned the great news. Now over here in the Wayne Park neighborhood, they're doing the same thing. You know, it's just grassroots. It's homeowners. You know, it's small business folks, and they've taken the lead of the folks on the west side of the connector. They're thinking they were able to fund the planning of it. It's gaining traction. You know, the neighborhood's gone total. You know, and so this is a great thing. You know? So it's exciting, and again, it's in my old neck of the woods. I know each one of these streets. You know, so anyway, in closing, I would just like to say, if you take a more personal look at transportation equity, environmental equity, let's continue to focus on the collective efforts, but so much of the good work is happening on, you know, just by people stepping back, squinting in at themselves, Mark, what are you doing? Yeah. And saying, is technology, is an electric car, or something like this, really going to be the answer toward improving equity? And could the development and funding of all the related infrastructure, electrical grid, things like this, could never happen fast enough to head off all of these perilous things that are happening both societally and environmentally? And so the answer is indeed within ourselves, but also collectively the good work that you all are doing. And it takes a certain amount of vision and belief. And so I'll leave it there with you. Again, you'll have links to all the stuff that I've posted in here. And at the end of it, there's a short bio about myself if anybody's running into it. So I very much appreciate your time. And it's just a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you.